Hi, everyone. This is a quick review for exam 8. So we're talking about digestion. What would I like you to know? Things like the definition of the 4 processes that are involved in digestion. The basic anatomy of the GI tract and the recognition that there are accessory glandular organs like salivary glands, like the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. Here we're looking at a cross-section of the stomach on the right. I'd like you to know the major layers of different cell types and structures. So there's the mucosa, the submucosa, the muscularis externa, and the serosa. And then in between, basically, the mucosa and the submucosa, there's something called the muscularis mucosa. If we look in the small intestine, we see the same basic layers. And when we look here at the muscularis mucosa, we can recognize that that's a thin layer of smooth muscle, and it contracts and relaxes in order to move these finger-like projections called the villi back and forth in the lumen of the small intestine. And that's going to aid digestion and absorption. Okay, then here we're looking on the right-hand side, something called these arrows are supposed to indicate what's called the migrating motor complex, which is a series of contractions that perform this housekeeping function of basically sweeping the GI tract clean and pushing everything into the large intestine. Here we're looking at a little bit of information about the cephalic and the gastric phases of digestion. So the cephalic phase of digestion begins either with the thought of food, the sight of food, the smell of food, or actually the presence of food in the mouth. Whereas the gastric phase, and gastric referring to stomach, the gastric phase begins when food actually enters the stomach. So in order to get food from the mouth to the stomach, you need to swallow. So I'd like for you to know the kind of major steps, major important things that have to happen in order for the swallowing reflex to go correctly. Here we're looking in the stomach in a little bit more detail. And in the top table, we see there are a variety of cell types that are arrayed within the gastric pits, these invaginations in the wall of the stomach lining. And there are a variety of different cell types, and they all carry out different functions and important functions. And so one of those functions, helpful to know, has to do with digestion of proteins. And so that involves secretion of acid and secretion of pepsinogen, which is going to be converted into active pepsin in order to aid in protein digestion. The next slide focuses on the enteric nervous system. So these red rectangles point out what I'm asking you to look at there. And those two things, those two plexi, which make up the enteric nervous system. And again, the enteric nervous system is like the little brain of the gut. Okay, there's the submucosal plexus, and it's going to control secretion from the epithelial cells. The myenteric plexus, which lies between the circular and longitudinal muscles, is basically going to play an important role in motility. And turns out that secretion and motility are the two most important functions that occur in digestion that are regulated. Okay, so the body has an abiding interest in making sure that both those things go well and in a coordinated way. here we're looking at a villi and a crypt and the lining of the small intestines. And again, remember that that submucosal plexus is going to control secretion from the epithelial cells. And important in a general way, what's important here is that most of the absorption is occurring in the small intestine. So that's if we look up close at what the lining of the small intestine looks like, it looks like this. And so I want you to appreciate how close these nets of capillaries are to the epithelial cells that are going to absorb nutrients. You can as well appreciate these structures called lacteals. And when the epithelial cells absorb nutrients, particularly when they absorb fats, the fats are going to enter the lacteals. Other nutrients are going to enter directly into the bloodstream. What's also going to be happening right at the beginning of the small intestine is that's where the pancreas is going to do its bit, play its important role for digestion. And so the pancreas is both an endocrine and an exocrine organ. Its endocrine function involves secretion of hormones like insulin. And again, endocrine means refers to cells that secrete something directly into the bloodstream. The exocrine function of the pancreas, which really takes up most of the tissue of the pancreas, that exocrine function involves secretion of digestive enzymes. So again, exocrine cells, they also secrete, but they don't secrete into the bloodstream, they secrete into ducts. Remember, the salivary glands are also exocrine organs. All right, so let's drill down a little bit on the exocrine function of the pancreas. And so if you look at these kind of orange colored circular nests of cells, those are called acinni. Each of the cells is an acinar cell. And those are the cells that make the digestive enzymes. And they're going to secrete them into the ducts. And those ducts are going to connect all the way up to the small intestine. So again, the acinar cells that are these clusters of acini, they secrete inactive digestive enzymes into the ducts. The ducts carry them into the small intestine, and then the small intestines produce enzymes that will turn those inactive digestive enzymes into active digestive enzymes. So separate from the acinar cells, there are the duct cells. And the duct cells are, what they do is they secrete bicarbonate solution. Okay, and that bicarbonate solution is important to mix in with the chyme from the stomach at the beginning of the small intestine and the duodenum. And why is that important? Because bicarbonate's a great buffer, which is going to try to neutralize the very acidic pH of the chyme that comes from the stomach, pH, something like pH 2. And that bicarbonate solution is going to bring the pH up more to like 8. Okay. And then it will travel through the small intestine, not as an acidic solution. The liver, important, and so basic, one of the basic functions of the liver is to detoxify the blood. So the way that works is there are capillary nets. We were just looking at capillaries in one of the villi in the small intestine, but there are capillary nets all around the digestive tract. Nutrients and other materials that are absorbed from the lumen into the capillaries are going to move from these capillaries, which are going to coalesce into something called the hepatic portal vein. Portal veins connect capillary beds. So the liver portal vein, connects the capillaries in the digestive tract with the capillaries in the liver. The liver cells are going to detoxify basically any substances that are in the blood, and they're going to return then those liver capillaries are going to coalesce back into the hepatic vein, which is going to carry the blood to the right side of the heart to pump to the lungs. From the right side of the heart, we're going to get oxygenated red rich blood via the hepatic artery, and that's to provide oxygen and nutrients to the hardworking hepatic cells, hepatocytes that are in the liver. So if we look closely at what the organization of this situation is here, the capillary beds and the hepatocytes. So best to look maybe at this lower panel where we see here the hepatic portal vein, this rather thick vertical blue vein. And it breaks up into sinusoids, which I hope you remember are those distinct type of capillaries that really readily exchange substances across the cell membranes. And so the importance of this structure, this kind of structure, is that the sinusoids are surrounded by what are shown in yellow are the hepatocytes. So that means that the hepatocytes have really easy access to all the substances that are in the blood, and that's how come it can deal, the hepatocytes can deal with those substances. So the hepatocytes are full of molecules that are going to deactivate harmful substances. Okay, then all those sinusoids are going to coalesce back into the hepatic vein, which is going to, again, bring that sort of quote unquote purified blood now to the left side of the heart. And then the last slide has to do with the large intestine, so the end of the digestive tract. And the job of the large intestine is multiple things. It's going to absorb water, vitamins, and electrolytes. It's not really, its job is not to absorb nutrients so much, because that's mainly happened in the small intestine. It's also going to sort of produce and store fecal matter until it's expelled. One thing that's kind of interesting, I think, is that so the chyme that enters the colon, it's going to get mixed by those segmental contractions that kind of just scooge the chyme back and forth to mix it. But there's a second kind of muscular activity that happens, which is called mass movement. So actual forward motion of matter through the colon is going to occur by what's called mass movement. And it's only 3 or 4 times a day that you're going to get this mass movement through the colon. And then eventually the fecal matter is going to arrive in the rectum, and that's going to stimulate the defecation reflex. Okay, all right, that's it for review of exam 8.